everyone, and welcome to Inquirer Live's Gameday Central, sponsored by Xfinity. I'm Gina Mizell, Sixers beat reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, joined by my colleague Keith Pompey. We are 2 days away from the Sixers playoff opener against the Brooklyn Nets on Saturday afternoon at the Wells Fargo Center. And this is a critical postseason run for the Sixers, who finished third in the Eastern Conference during the regular season. Are they legitimate championship contenders, or will they fail to get past the second round again? We'll discuss all of that today. Let's get started. Keith, let's kind of zoom out to start this conversation, and we'll get to the Nets series in particular. But when you look at the Sixers overall this season and sort of how they stack up in the Eastern Conference, I've got a two-part question for you. And this kind of lines up with a topic during Sixers practice earlier this afternoon is this the best team of the Joel Embiid era? And if so, what type of pressure or stakes does that now come with as the Sixers prepare to start this postseason run?
The first question is no, this isn't the best team of the Joel Embiid era. The best team was when they had Jimmy Butler, JJ Redick, Tobias, Ben Simmons, and they also had a better bench, to be honest with you. I mean, no offense to the guys they have now, but I feel like that was the best team. I mean, that was a team that was on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
Now, there is some type of pressure for them to get out, because when you look at the 76ers, they're 1-11 in second round contests since 1986. So when Doc Rivers was saying, hey, I was in college, I was this, I was da, like he was joking, but at the same time, he was being real. So I do think there is some pressure for the Sixers to get out, just because of, people are like, here we go again. You won 54 games, but if you can't get out of the second round, then people are going to look at it. This season is all for naught.
Yeah, I mean, if you just kind of look at the path to the finals, I mean, I think there is a legitimate argument to say that the Sixers are the third best team in the NBA, which under normal circumstances would be like, wow, that's a really good team. But, are Boston, Milwaukee ahead of them, and having to potentially go through both of those teams to reach the finals, and just it stacks up at kind of how you think. I mean, I think if you would have asked us at the beginning of the season, where would the Sixers finish? This is probably about right. I think they closed the season with how road heavy and difficult March was, maybe a little bit better than we thought. But still, it's like you got to go through both of those teams. And again, that's not disrespecting anybody in a pretty wide open Western Conference. But I think the best two teams in the NBA are the ones that are stacked right in front of them.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And when you look at it, you have to commend the Sixers for what happened this season. They started off 0-3. They were 12-12 through 24 games. And then all of a sudden, in the month of January and February and a little bit of March, they were the hottest team in the NBA. They had a great run, but you are correct. I mean, you look at the Milwaukee Bucks, they were battling injuries and they were still able to weather the storm. And we're not even going to get into the offseason problems that the Boston Celtics had, and that led to them getting the interim coach. And now he's going to be the coach. But, both of those teams are a notch above the 76ers in regards to, how they played this year. But, you look at it, I think the Sixers did have a phenomenal season. They just happen to be a little notch below those two squads right now.
Has anything surprised you about, we've now been to practice 3 days in a row. It's kind of interesting now with the NBA, with the play-in tournaments, that, the teams that don't participate in the play-in tournaments have basically a week off before the playoffs start. Doc Rivers was a little, not combative, but he was a little pushback on the pressure question. Other guys have been asked about it, but, I thought Paul Reed had actually a pretty candid response earlier today that he's like, we know what's in front of us and we know the opportunity and we know what do you kind of just sense from the guys as they start to prepare? Because Doc has a point in that most of these guys weren't alive or were very, very young when the last time they got out of the second round and haven't been here for the whole time that the fan base has maybe suffered through these playoff failures. But still, this is kind of, it feels like a very important moment for the Sixers franchise.
I agree 100%. I love Doc to death. I like Doc. but Doc was the master of coach speak. I felt like today, I felt like, he was saying, this and that, but the questions were very specific. I felt like, I mean, they were like, were the pressure on you, and given though, let's face it, Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey came here because the Sixers failed to get out of the second round. You have Doc Rivers, who was ninth all time in wins. And then you have Daryl Morey, who's one of the most high profile executives in all sports, not the NBA, all sports. So when you look at that, it's one of those things where, you mean to tell me you guys can't get out of the second round when there was Brett Brown was the coach, general manager, and things like that. So I think Doc was kind of like bringing it all the way back to 1986. But I know it, but we all know what he means. And then in regards to Paul Reed, yes, Paul Reed was kept at 100, as they say. He was the guy that says, yes, there is pressure, because he knows that it's one of those things where, this is supposed to be one of the better teams they had. They went out there and got all these off-season acquisitions, and they said they were going to bring toughness. And if you can't get out of the second round, then there could be some repercussions, after this season. So, I'm more with Paul, I think, and I know Doc doesn't want to raise the pressure level by admitting to it, but I think Doc was doing a lot of coach speak.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the pieces that they have added. I mean, I think whether you want to say this is the best team of the Embiid era or the Butler, JJ Redick team that lost on the Kawhi shot, I think you can, those definitely are the best two that Joel Embiid has had, whichever way you land on that. This team is certainly better than last year. When you look at the depth they've added, when you look at just the shooting, the intangibles, like you mentioned before, how do you feel like that is now going to play in a playoff scenario when you look at guys like a PJ Tucker, DeAnthony Melton, just kind of the extra depth and the versatility that they have in the rotation? How much of a factor do you think that will be overall looking at this broader playoff run?
You know what? I'm really intrigued to see it. I really am. The thing about PJ, PJ is a guy that he's 37 years old. There's a lot of people who are extremely critical of him. But when you look at it, a guy that's 37, you may say to yourself, playing 82 games night in and night out may be a little bit too much. Whereas a playoff setting is better for him because you have days in between games. Everything is a little bit slower. He can be real physical and do the things he wants. I'm really like, you want to say that it's going to be so much better, right? You want to say that. But at the same time, I think it's going to be a wait and see. And I'm excited to see what he can do because, Gina, you see it. We both see it. We comment on it all the time. Like, he's a guy who gets a pass and then he'll like dribble a couple times. And while he's passing the ball to his teammate, he's simultaneously setting the screen. He's doing all those little things. There's times when he can grab a rebound, but what he does is he tips it to another teammate so that person can go out and go. Those are little things that a lot of people don't recognize in box scores, or they may not even understand what's going on while they watch it in real time during the game. But his teammates appreciate it, and it's called winning basketball. So I am excited to see that. I'm also excited to see what DeAnthony Melton could do. Like, I think that's a guy who I'm kind of pulling for because of the struggles he had in Memphis. And now he's here because of those struggles. But at the same time, he has a larger role. So, and Jalen McDaniels, because, a two-way player. So I'm excited to see what these guys can do.
Yeah, just to tease something for tomorrow, you mentioned Tucker and just all the intangibles. I've been working on a piece basically all season where I've pulled guys that he's played with before at the previous stops in his career and basically said, give me your best PJ Tucker stories and sort of things that exemplify exactly what you're talking about. And people, and again, this is what I think sometimes fans don't understand, is that when you say the name PJ Tucker, like even former teammates he doesn't play with anymore, their face just like lights up and they just want to talk about everything he meant to teams like Milwaukee when they won the title, Miami last year, Houston when Harden was there, even Phoenix going back to early in his career. So I think hopefully that will be, something that maybe sheds some light on what this playoff run might mean and why the Sixers valued him so much. But I just mentioned James Harden, and I feel like he's a guy that when it comes to playoff basketball always gets the wait and see, I think can apply to him as well, because there have been a lot of times during his career when he has, he hasn't come up big. And you can even look at game 6 against Miami last year when he made those comments about the ball not coming back to me. And what did he take, 1 shot in the second half or something crazy like that in their last loss. So maybe specifically for James, what do you feel like, or what are you most intrigued to see as he gets, going during this postseason run?
And this isn't, I'm not saying this for James, but and I hope he doesn't get offended by it. But the best advice somebody could give to James is keep it. That I heard my dad used to say this to me: keep it simple, stupid. Mm-hmm. Keep it simple, stupid. Right. So I'm not calling James stupid. I'm just saying what my father used to say to me. Mm-hmm. And for James, I think he has to keep it simple. The thing about James is, when you look at it, when he first came back, that first game in Houston, that was probably one of his worst performances of the season, because I felt like he wanted to attack the moment and show everybody that I'm James Harden, I'm a future Hall of Famer, I'm going to do this. And he just wasn't his normal self. He was missing shots. Guys were streaking wide open. He wasn't passing the ball. And then since that point, what James Harden turned into was this phenomenal facilitator. And the
league in assists, yeah.
Exactly, leading the league in assists. But the person, like when you look at James, he averaged, 10.7 assists per game? 4.8 of them went to Joel Embiid. So when I say, keep it simple and keep it easy, it's one of those things is feed Joel Embiid, get out in transition, pass the ball to Tyrese Maxey. The ball's going to come back to you late in the games because people are trying to stop them. And then you can stick your jumper, you can do your crossover, you can do whatever. But I feel like for the Sixers to be successful and for James to be successful, he has to be that facilitator that gets everyone involved. And the number one guy he has to get cooking is Joel Embiid.
Yeah, and we haven't seen Joe for the last couple games, much like many of the starters who sat out those last couple games when everything was locked up. But are there any concerns for you about kind of the lingering or injuries that popped up for Harden or for Embiid late in the season, especially with having kind of this week off? Or either one of those things a concern for you?
The Harden thing is a concern. You would think that the Embiid one would be, being as though like, here we go again, the playoffs, we're waiting for something. But I feel like Embiid has reached a point to where he's saying to himself, like, whatever it is, I have to suck it up and I have to play. I have to go out there and do it. The thing about, an Achilles, and we're talking about for a point guard, right? And all the cutting, the moving, all the misdirection. I mean, everything that James has to do, even on defense, lateral movement. It just concerns me a little bit because, they're saying he was dealing with this for a while. So you don't want to make it worse, So to me, that's the biggest concern. And then we also do the age factor. He's 33 years old now. So your body doesn't recover the way it used to. So if there's an injury, that's the one that really concerns me is James' Achilles.
Yeah, no, it would be a shame just given that he had the hamstring struggles the last couple of years and then to have something else pop up. But we'll see how both of them look again after quite a bit of rest here with those last couple of games and then this week leading up to the playoffs. We'll talk a lot more Joe a little bit later on in his MVP chances and all that stuff. But let's now look at this first round series. And we were sort of joking before we went live that if you would have told both of us in September, like, oh, the Sixers and the Nets are going to have a playoff series, we would have been like, oh my gosh, storylines galore. You've got the trade, you've got Ben Simmons, you've got Harden going up against Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And that obviously is all very, very much changed. And the Sixers have played the Nets twice since the trade, but really only one time because Sunday's season finale does not count. And even the only other time that they played them, that was their first game for Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson when they came over from the Kevin Durant trade. So really there's a lot of, I think, unknown or uncertainty maybe going into this matchup. But just overall, what are the biggest things that stand out to you as far as these two teams?
The one thing you just said, like, is the uncertainty. Like, that stands out. I mean, of course, when you look at Joel Embiid, and you say they don't have anyone that can guard Joel at all, right? We all know that. But the thing is, when I look at this team, and I do think the Sixers are the better team. I think the Sixers are going to win this series, right? But here's the deal. The thing that concerns me, and you know more than most because you're from Phoenix, you have relationships with these guys, you
Mm-hmm.
covered the Suns.
Mm-hmm.
Mikal Bridges is a phenomenal defender, and people in
Mm-hmm.
Philly know that, right? But he's a phenomenal defender. So is Dorian Finney-Smith, right?
Yep.
Great defenders, and then also they have a bunch of shooters around them. This is a long, athletic team. Now, again, I expect the Sixers to win the series, but I wouldn't be shocked if this team steals a game, especially the first game, just because of the newness the Sixers have to deal with. And so to me, that's what really stands out that this team, they're long, they're athletic, they have a lot of shooters, and they have quality perimeter defenders who can take out Maxey a little bit if they could try to. They could take out James, they could try to. But at the same time, I don't see anyone on the perimeter being able to stop their guys from shooting threes.
Yeah.
You have DeAnthony Melton, but outside of that, I don't see it. I don't see it.
Yeah, when you got guys like Joe Harris who can put up shots, and Seth Curry, the old friend of Philly. Yeah, it'll be really interesting. And yeah, you mentioned Mikal Bridges. Shout out to him, who, like you said, I covered him for 3 years in Phoenix, starting with his rookie season. And I don't need to tell anyone in Philly what a great player he was for Nova, but I watched his offensive game develop season by season by season, but I never envisioned he could be a number one on a playoff team and have an offense kind of revolve around him. And, some of that is circumstances. He's the best guy for the job right now, given the way their team is constructed. But it's been really impressive to see that he's now a guy that can drop 40 points on any given night. So that's a testament to him. But like you said, the defense is still his bread and butter, and that's something that the Sixers are going to have to deal with for however long the series lasts.
Yeah, and I want to say this, and please, Gina, don't throw darts at me or smack me next time you see me or do whatever. This kind of reminds me, and they're different types of players, but this rebirth kind of reminds me of James Harden when he left Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Because people forgot he was like a bench player, the sixth man.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to the Houston Rockets. They give him the keys, and then all of a sudden he becomes a 10-time All-Star, right?
Yep.
3-time scoring champion, MVP. And I'm not trying to put that pressure on Mikal and to say he's going to do that. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge that he was a role player. He goes to Brooklyn, and now he had 3 games with 40 or more points. He had 13 or 14 games with 30 or more points. Mm-hmm. So, this guy is putting it up, and it reminds me a little bit of what happened when James Harden was traded to the Houston Rockets from Oklahoma City.
Yeah, it's a great comparison, and just, again, shows that sometimes all you need is an opportunity, and different team constructs can sort of unlock different guys in certain ways. What do you feel like we've talked about the shooting and the defense and kind of the like-size guys that the Nets have, but inside, I feel like that's kind of the one area, of course, Joel Embiid's going to have the advantage over basically anybody, but especially with Nick Claxton, who is a really fun player to watch, has had a great season, but is just so undersized that this kind of feels almost like the perfect series for Joe to both ease in, but also assert his dominance, if that makes any sense. Kind of what's your take on that?
My take is on Twitter. I'm gonna have a lot of memes of people eating cake, just chewing. I think Joel's going to devour him. Don't get me wrong. Claxton is a good defender, a quality shot blocker, one of the best in the league. But like you said, Nick Claxton might be 220 pounds. Joel was listed as 280. He's probably over 3. Most likely over 3. I just think that they don't have anyone that can stop them at all. And then you take Claxton out there, and then who you going to bring in? So, yeah, you're right. This is going to be one of those people in Brooklyn might even start chanting MVP. By the way, Joel is going to dominate this series.
Yeah, let's just, for the Sixers' sake, they certainly hope that he can get out of there healthy, because not to bring up bad memories, but it was the first round series against Toronto last year where he tore his thumb, and then because the series went to 6 games and the Sixers couldn't close it out sooner, that's when he got popped in the face by Pascal Siakam and literally broke his face and got a concussion and had to miss the first 2 games of that Miami series. But as far as X factors in this series on either team, anybody stand out to you? I know our colleague David Murphy is going to be writing about Tyrese Maxey and kind of the importance of him continuing his strong play to potentially set up for a Boston second round series. But yeah, does anybody stand out to you in that regard that might have a chance to be kind of a breakout player given the matchup?
Do you want it from both teams?
Either one. Yeah.
You know what? It's funny. The one guy who I'm really interested in seeing how they play, just because of the history, is Seth Curry. Just because he's Doc Rivers' son-in-law. He was happy when he was traded to the Sixers to play for his father-in-law, living in Philly. His wife was excited, and then they go to Brooklyn in the trade. And sometimes you have certain players who they get this extra motivation. Not saying he needs it, but I think that's a fire where he says, "What you mean? You guys thought you were better off with me? You didn't want me anymore? You wanted James Harden instead of me." And we know, like, a couple of times when he played against the Sixers, he kind of lit him up a little bit. So he's a guy, in my opinion, that could be an X factor just because of the shots he could make. And we know that the Sixers give up a lot of perimeter threes.
Yeah, no, he's an instant offense quintessential guy in that regard, where, I even remember last year before the trade, there were some quarters where you're like, how does Seth Curry have 15 points in this quarter or something crazy like that? So that's a good call there. If I were to give a couple on the Sixers side, it's actually 2 guys that you mentioned. DeAnthony Melton, very interested to see how he plays in the playoffs, given that that's kind of where he lost some of his minutes in Memphis. And also just given his regular season was kind of bizarre, and really he was the one who had to move around the most when it was guys were hurt and he was starting and then he was coming off the bench and then he was starting again and then they flipped it back to Tyrese. And if he could settle into a role, I think that would be a really good thing for him. And then Jalen McDaniels is the other guy too, because they're going to need him as a perimeter versatile defender. And he's a guy who's never played in the playoffs before. He's played in the play-in tournament with Charlotte, but this is his first experience and kind of the next step in what I'm sure has been a whirlwind couple of months for him. So I'm interested to see how both of those guys do in this type of environment, because they're both relatively young players, but kind of being put in positions where they have a chance to really make an impact. So you mentioned that you thought the Sixers would win this series. Do you want to throw out any predictions, anything like that? I know we were talking about that earlier on today at practice.
Yeah, it's funny because I keep going back and forth, right? I keep saying to myself, like, something's telling me it's going to go to 6. Something's telling me. But then, like, my mind is telling me, come on, Keith, they're going to end it in 5. I think they win in 5. I do. I think the 76ers win the series in 5 games.
Yeah, I think that's what I would say as well. It's just so hard to sweep somebody these days, unless it's like a 1-8 type matchup, I guess. But I think 5 is probably right. And again, we saw last year against the Raptors that the Sixers won the first 3 games of that series and then could not close it out. Finally did in 6 games. But I think the cliche that closeout games are really tough, I think that's true in a lot of ways, because these guys are so competitive and know each other so well by the time they get to that point in a series. So yeah, I think Sixers in 5 is a good call. Let's finish up with some Joel Embiid specific talk. Not just about will he win MVP or won't he win MVP, but when you look at, I feel like this is kind of a good time to just reflect on another sensational season that he's had. And you're someone who's covered his whole career. What has most impressed you specifically about this season and the way that he has continued to evolve and progress and improve as a player?
I think, and you wrote it today in a great article that you had. I think that, first of all, his basketball IQ is extremely high, right? So let's start with that. I think the difference is where he's positioned at on the floor. Makes more, because he's like, people now, before he was in the post or he was at the 3-point line. Now he's like at the elbow or at the nail, whatever you want to call it, the foul line, and he's facing. But I have to say it, his effort is tremendous compared to in the past. Nothing against Joel, but there was times when Joel took off. Like Joel wouldn't play on the defensive end unless he had to, or there was times in the games where he would be on cruise control because he was like conserving energy. It just seems like now maybe it's because of his health. Maybe he's a lot more healthier this year than he has been in years past. But it just seems like he's always bringing it and he's making a major impact in games. And the last thing I will say is he's better now passing the ball to teammates. Before he was a turnover waiting to happen. Now he's like waiting for people to come and then zipping it out. So those are the things I say that really impress me. I know that's more than one, but those are all collectively the things that impress me.
And they're all connected, right? It's like because of his basketball IQ that allows him to play more in the middle of the floor and to make moves and attack, but also pass. And because the effort is there, there's more versatility. And I would say on the defensive end of the floor as well is where you're seeing that effort, because you look at his, especially after the All-Star break, his block numbers, he was averaging like over 2 blocks a game. I can think of at least 2 or 3 that were like impactful, that like made a difference in the game. And you know, the Sixers didn't quite finish as the #1 defense in the league like he wanted at the start of the season, but when they play really good defense, it's because he's anchoring them, and we saw that in many games throughout the season, but I feel like particularly down the stretch that he really showed why he's a force on both ends of the floor, which is one of the strongest arguments for him to be MVP.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So you do have a vote. Do you want to reveal your vote, or do you want to keep that secret until that?
It's cool. It's cool. I mean, yeah. I voted for him, you know. I mean, and the thing is, it's weird. Like last year was the first year I actually voted for him. I felt like he deserved it last year. And then this year I felt like he deserved it more so than last. I mean, think about it, Gina. We were there. We saw when they played Utah, he scored 59 points and he had 7 block shots. If Joel would have scored 58 points or 55 points and had 6 block shots, they would have lost. The same thing with this game and in Boston when he had 52 points and 13 rebounds. So you look at him and I know a lot of people get caught up with the statistics and the analytics of everything, or they say the best player on the best team. But there were several games, if you took Joel Embiid off the floor, the Sixers would have lost by double digits, right? So to me, he is the most valuable player because of that. And it's not one of those things I just voted for him because I cover him, and I try to keep it to I vote for the guy who I think deserves it the most. In these 2 seasons, I felt like Joel Embiid deserved it the most.
Yeah. Last question before we wrap up is just on that note, does this feel like it sounds like a silly question, but the importance of this particular postseason run, whether he wins MVP or not, because we're going to find that out in the middle of the playoffs. But this sort of feels like he's building to, provided he stays healthy, potentially a dominant postseason run, and they're going to need it if they're going to get past Boston and or Milwaukee.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, I mean, we talk about, I think there's 2 people, like he has to be extremely dominant and James Harden has to be that guy we talked about earlier, doing all those things, dominating in that way. Nothing against the guys on the Sixers team, but the Sixers aren't as deep as the Boston Celtics, nor are they as deep as the Milwaukee Bucks. They're not as deep as the Denver Nuggets, right? So it has to be Joel Embiid. He has to play as if he's the MVP in order for them to win these games. And James Harden has to be the best Robin to his Batman impression that he can do in order for them to win games.
We will see how it all unfolds. And of course, it starts Saturday afternoon against the Brooklyn Nets at the Wells Fargo Center. But that is going to do it for our show today. Thank you so much for joining us on Inquirer Live at Gameday Central, sponsored by Xfinity. Head over to inquirer.com/Sixers Game Day for the latest on the matchup between the Sixers and the Nets. Gameday Central is the destination for fans and reporters to connect before and during the game. I'm your host, Gina Mizell, Sixers beat reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Enjoy the playoffs, and we hope to see you again here on the next Inquirer Live.